What's going on? I'm Sykotix with Lonesome Studios, and today I'm going to tell you 7 things that you should be checking for in your mix. Okay, so most of these are going to be for not necessarily upcoming producers, but they help for when you can't finish that song you've been working on, or sometimes they give you good starting points for songs that you haven't yet created. But I feel like all of them help you or help us as producers to try and identify best practices with each track. So I run through this checklist kind of with every track just to make sure that it can be the best that it can be, that I'm utilizing all the tools. So number 1 is referencing. Referencing is, where you find tracks that are similar to yours, tracks that you like, and it's very important that you need to like them, obviously. And then you can use them to structure your arrangements. You can use them to help you with ideas, melodic ideas, and you can listen to the mix as well to compare actually the weighting of it and how your mix is supposed to sound. Now, that's why I said earlier, it's tracks that you like and tracks that you want to learn how to make, because we learn through replicating stuff that we've heard before until we amalgamate it into our own style. So use reference tracks and use visual plugins like Span to be able to help you visualize the space in which your song sits within. Number 2 is organization. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it goes a long way, especially as creatives, when some of our paths from point A to point B can be quite convoluted. So organizing makes you have a method to your madness, or we all have our own methods of madness, but this helps when you go too deep into the rabbit hole and maybe you've got a bunch of ideas, melodies and sounds that you don't know whether or not you're going to use. Organization can help you, and it can help with collaboration with other producers, other musicians, and artist sessions as well. So rename your channels, rename groups, use locators. In Ableton, you can actually use locators on the timeline, and it splits the timeline all the way down the middle. So it visually gives you a visual representation as to, how long your chorus is, how long your verse is, how long the bridge should be. And this organization, it does go a long way. Color code some stuff as well. Number 3 is saturation. Now, saturation is a big deal. Saturation, the effect saturation. Adding saturation to your sounds is going to give it a little bit more attitude and a little bit more bite. Adding saturation to your whole mix in general over time is just going to give it more depth. What saturation actually is, you're basically adding overtones of harmonics. You're adding extra harmonic content, sometimes above, or most of the times above, and sometimes below the fundamental frequency. So you're increasing the richness of whatever sound that you're actually saturating. Now, you can get some nice effects like harmonic distortion with some bass sound as well through saturation. Most saturator plugins, they have soft clipping. Now, soft clipping is useful when you want to achieve a louder result without sacrificing quality or brick wall hard limiting whatever sound you want to squeeze more of that life out of. With saturation, because it adds so many different frequencies along the spectrum, it's good practice to EQ after you saturate. You can EQ before you saturate. That's entirely up to you, depending on your initial sound. But you want to EQ after you saturate because it will add some extra harmonics and frequencies that weren't present there in the beginning, such as low rumble, stuff that's underneath like 20 hertz or stuff that's underneath 50 hertz. That's not entirely necessary. Good saturator plugins would be like the Saturator on Ableton or FabFilter Saturn. I think they just released Saturn 2. So yeah, use those. Number 4 is frequency. Use EQ in pairs to create sonic relationships within your tracks. Now, I mentioned this before with a kick and bass example. So you'll EQ your kick and your bass, and your EQ might often mirror those two. Same thing with like hi-hats. Anything that's occupying the same space of frequency, because your sounds sit in a spectrum, and the more you add, the denser the spectrum gets, right? Within something like span, or within any type of spectral analyzer, you'll have a window and a spectrum and an analyzer that goes from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. This is basically where the entirety of where your song lives. Your song lives in that space. So if it's all cluttered up, it's just gonna be like a wall of sound, a wall of frequency. So those pairs are gonna be what they're competing with. So equalizers like, you know, the Pull Tech or any type of equalizer, FabFilter does Pro Q3. And with FabFilter Pro Q3, you can actually shows you, using an external sidechain input, it actually shows you where other frequencies are clashing with other Pro Q devices on there. Yeah, carve out space with your frequencies by using EQ pairs. And that just basically means pair liked sounds, or sounds that are competing in the same frequency range. You want to sort of EQ them. You either want to mirror the EQ that you're doing to them, or EQ them somewhat similar. Number 5 is faders down. Faders down. Okay, so a fader down mix is where you start your mix, or sometime during your mix, you will, when you're making the track, you'll turn all of your master faders, so not any volume plugins that you have on the track, the actual fader of the whole track itself. You'll bring all of those faders down to 0. You'll bring all of them down to -infinity. And then you'll start to bring each track up by order of importance. So I make a lot of bass heavy music. I make a lot of trap style music, that, you know, music that relies on very beefy low end. So I would turn everything down, and my kick would go up first, and then maybe my bass or something like that, and then it would probably be the rest of my drums, and then my melody, and then any effects that I have. So over time, I would push up my faders according to importance, because that's what I want. That's the most important thing that I want the mix to hear. So for me, because I work with low end material, the most prominent things in my the most prominent sounds in my mix tend to be the bass and the kick and the snare. So those tend to be the highest level, fader level in my mix. When I do a fader down, I'll bring all the sounds down, and then over time I will bring them up. And this is also going to increase your headroom as well, because the rule of thumb is, if it sounds good quiet, it's going to sound good loud. So yes, when you start your tracks, and also make a habit of, when you make a new track on your DAW, on your DAW, I have it set to Ableton, so whenever I make a new track, the track is automatically at -10 dB, and it just gives me headroom. So it's just going to increase your headroom as well, and it just increase some of the spaces that you have for your instruments to play in between. Number 6 is dynamics. It's kind of a broad one, but just in general, just check the dynamics of your sound. If you feel like the mix is flat, or you feel like it's not moving, or you feel like there's too much going on, or it's not dynamic enough, is to check the dynamics of the sounds, and of sounds that are clashing as well. Sometimes you can add sounds for feeling, not necessarily to be heard. So you can add, during your ambient section, you can add a couple of pads. You can have a pad playing in the high register, so let's say above like middle C, and then you'll have a pad playing in the low register, around about in the mid range, and then you might have a background pad that is wide in the stereo field, that has like a bandpass filter on it, that literally isn't really, that you can only hear during the absences of the other sound in your track. So you can use some of these, you can use dynamics to your advantage. It doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be loud, or if something's not loud or not playing, it needs to be super quiet as well. Learn to have sounds weave in and out of each other. So use compression, use multi-band compression as well, not on everything. Dynamics can help make your sound pop. It does depend on the style of the mix as well. But this refers back to referencing I was saying earlier. If you have a good reference track and you know that's that type of track you want to end up producing or end up making, listen to the dynamics in that track. Is it loud? Is it soft? Like, have they squashed everything? Does it sound, flat? Does it sound tinny? Is it a country track? Is it a rock track? It depends on the style of mixing and the style of song and genre that you're going to be in. That's going to affect how you treat your dynamics. Number 7, and the last one, is stereo field. Yeah, you need to utilize the stereo field and balance your sounds. And it's more than just left and right. You've got left, center, right, front, back, realistically. And then you've got other stuff like true pan. So if you're on Logic, I'm not sure if they have that now, but if you're on Logic, make sure you check out true pan or binaural panning. There's so much to do with the stereo field nowadays, and every time you introduce a sound or you put a sound into your song, into your mix, it's going to be slap bang in the middle in mono at first. But then after a while, when you start adding your sounds, it's gonna feel lifeless because it's all gonna be coming out of from the same direction. And our ears are tuned to more soundstage. They're a soundstage environment. They're tuned to more sound localization. Place your sounds wide and narrow depending on importance, right? So maybe your kick will be mono, maybe your kick will be in the middle, and your bass will be slightly wider, not 100% mono because it'll clash with the kick, but maybe slightly wider. And then your pads might be in the middle. I would say treat the stereo field like a reverse triangle, like an upside down triangle. So your bass and your kick and heavier elements are going to be somewhat mono, and then as soon as you get higher in frequencies, so you get to like your 800 hertz, 1000 hertz, 4000 hertz, and then up to like maybe 8000 hertz, you want to get wider and wider and wider in the stereo field. You want to get wider in the stereo field as your frequency increases. That's a good rule of thumb because higher frequencies they tend to be associated with airiness, and airiness doesn't really have too much of a localization, and it's just nice. It's kind of the icing on the cake. It's just nice to hear. If you have mid-side EQs as well, use a mid-side function on your EQs to, again, control the frequencies and control the dynamics and the stereo field of the sounds that you are experimenting with in terms of soundstage, because then you'll get stuff like phase cancellation, other things of that nature. But yeah, those were 7 tips that I hope that you'll be able to use when it comes to making your songs pop out a little bit more, and just mix principles as well. So I hope I'll see you next time.